teachers. Teachers don't get to grade them. Teachers, in many instances, aren't even going to get to see the results. When we say high-stakes testing, we mean high stakes for the teachers. Because that's how we evaluate teachers now. If your teachers can't get kids to this standard, to satisfy the, not even satisfying the principals anymore, or their local school districts, or the governors, the states of your states. Now, if you don't get your kids to the standard that the federal government wants, as a teacher, you may lose your job, you may not get tenure. You're a principal of a school that can't get enough kids to the standard, you're replaced. This is shockingly unfair to teachers. How in the world do you hold teachers accountable for a set of curriculum standards they didn't write and had no say in, and tests they didn't write, don't get to grade, and don't even get to see? You see how much power is being ceded? Everybody knows that the way kids learn, and every study has shown that the way kids learn best is when you have a committed parent, a disciplined child, and an effective teacher. That's all you need. I'm quoting a video clip I'll show you later. You know, we became a superpower in this country on the backs of men and women who learned in one-room schoolhouses. That's what works, right? Teachers, moms and dads, and students. And yet, Common Core is 180 degrees removed from that. Everything is regulated federally. What goes on in your classrooms now is not being determined by the teachers who know your kids, see what they need, know what the community is like that the kids came out of. Your teachers are utterly handcuffed. Do we have any teachers here? Well, then you know, right, that there are sometimes you just have to throw out the curriculum with a group of kids. You may have 30 kids, you have to throw out the lesson plan. Sometimes you just have to go completely off script and be creative to get that group of kids to learn something. How do you do that when the whole thing is scripted, enforced, and tested nationally? How do you do that? This is what's at stake at this. How about this? All right? So, no teacher input. How about the second biggest teachers union in the country? How about the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers? And by the way, as radically progressive as the NEA is, the AFT, the second largest teachers union, that's considered to be more radical. That's where the teachers go, the AFT, who don't think the NEA is left-wing enough. But check this out and notice the date, July of this year. In a major surprise, of course it is, the AFT, this country's second largest teachers union, opened its convention Friday by announcing a step back from Common Core. AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, will now provide monetary grants for teachers to critique the standards or write new ones. They're paying their teachers to write better standards. The AFT's Executive Council also introduced a resolution declaring that the standards may have had noble intentions, but they have fallen short due to outside meddling and an inordinate focus on standardized testing. CCSS has also seen other opposition on the left as well, particularly from a new faction of almost 100,000 left-wing teachers who have named themselves the Badass Teachers Organization. This is a group of teachers within the AFT, 100,000, who don't think the AFT is progressive enough. So they've called themselves the Badass Teachers, and they are fighting Common Core tooth and nail, right? So because that's their whole strategy. When they dismiss you as a kook, what they're going to tell you when you fight this, you're a right-winger, we're not going to listen to you. You don't have an education degree. We're not going to listen to you, right? You heard that one? Hell, I've heard that one. I've got 2 master's degrees and a PhD, and I teach education majors every semester. And I hear you have no business to talk about this because you don't have a degree in education. But when they do that to you, you ask them this. What's Bill Gates' education background? What's Arnie Duncan's education background? What's David Coleman's education background? What's the people who wrote the standards education? They don't have that. Not enough. That doesn't bother them. We're criticizing it and we're invalidated because we don't have education degrees. But the people who wrote and implemented the standards have no meaningful education background, and yet they're exonerated from that criticism. Right? How about my personal favorite? How about the Chicago Teachers Union? President Obama. You know, when you want to talk about state teachers unions, these guys are the loopiest. This is the same group, the Chicago Teachers Union, who a couple years ago approved a curriculum that would sanction the teaching of masturbation techniques to 5-year-olds, kindergarten kids. You know who their commencement speaker was, their Martin Luther King Day speaker was for elementary school kids this year? Elementary school kids. The Reverend Jeremiah Wright. So these are some of the right-wing kooks who oppose Common Core. Now here's what Karen Lewis said. There she is, the Teachers Union president. She's now running for mayor of Chicago, Karen is. Right? And here's what she says about Common Core, quote, "I agree with educators and parents from across the country. The Common Core mandate represents an overreach of federal power into personal privacy. Karen's telling you that's data mining. All this stuff they're going to be gathering on your kids that your school denies is going to happen. Right? Overreach of federal power into personal privacy as well as into state educational autonomy. There's your state and local control. It's going away. How about this? Common Core, quote, eliminates creativity in the classroom and impedes collaboration. We also know that high-stakes standardized testing is designed to rank and sort our children, and it contributes significantly to racial discrimination and the achievement gap in our schools. And she's right. You know where the biggest agreement between the right and the left on Common Core is? What it does to special needs kids, and what it does to kids who are already behind and struggling, many of which are inner-city minority kids. All right? That's where this is coming from. That's a damning indictment in President Obama's own backyard. Not only did the Chicago Teachers Union president say that, the entire union drafted 30 anti-Common Core resolutions. I can't show you all of them. I'll show you a couple of them. Here's what the resolution says. Instructional and curricular decisions should be in the hands of classroom professionals. This wasn't done. The people writing and grading and crafting, they weren't educated. The instructional and curricular decisions should be in the hands of classroom professionals who understand the context and interests of your students. Do you honestly believe some bureaucrat in Washington better knows what kids in Ocala or places like Orlando need? Right? That one-size-fits-all education emanating from Washington is going to be able to help kids in Miami and kids in rural Florida who need radically different things to even get started? And conservative people and Christian people, we always get suckered because you hear the word standards, right? And that's how the Common Core people phrase this. If you oppose Common Core, you just don't want standards. You know, for 200 years in this country, when you had teachers giving tests and grades, and moms and dads sending their kids to school, you had a standard. And it worked. Right? The idea that without Common Core, well, but we've heard that before, right? You remember that if you didn't support the Affordable Care Act, you wanted people to die on the streets? Yeah. And you remember how if you don't support the latest radical agenda on abortion, it's a war on women? Yeah? This is the same thing. They're trying to threaten you. If you don't support Common Core, then you just don't want standards. And as conservative Christianity, by definition, is the world's golden standard, isn't it? Everything we do as Christians and conservatives, religious people, it's standards-based. So the idea that somehow that only the bigger the standard is, the better, is absolutely absurd here. How about this? Education of children should be grounded in developmentally appropriate information, practice. You've heard listen who's telling you this, the Teachers Union in Chicago. Common Core is developmentally inappropriate. Not only is it age inappropriate, why? Why so much sex? Why so much violence? Why so much graphic stuff in the Common Core materials? Why all these lesson plans being pulled out of Common Core textbooks? You saw the other one just the other day. It was from Massachusetts, I believe it was, or Michigan. I get my M's mixed up. They were comparing Bush to Hitler. Yeah. Did you see that? Yeah. What's all this doing in there? They're telling you it's inappropriate. How about this? Common Core standards were developed by non-practitioners, non-educators, including test and curriculum publishers, right? In other words, the people who are behind this are making a lot of money providing the information for it. You know who the second biggest private donor to Common Core is after Bill Gates? It's Pearson Publishing. Mm-hmm. Pearson owns 100% of the Canadian textbook market. You can't buy a Canadian textbook that's not Pearson. Pearson already owns 80% of the American textbook market. And over the last 2 years, they've bought 40 different small presses in America, paying 5 and 6 times what they're worth. They want the same monopoly. And you know, right, that Pearson has the exclusive contract with the federal government to produce, write, and score all the tests. You know, Pearson makes about $30 on every test your kids take. And by the way, what's being an English professor, what's 30 times 60 million? Do you know last year alone, your federal government, your federal government paid Pearson $350 million to develop and implement the materials. And when Pearson wrote them, they charged the states for them and kept the money. Why is your federal government paying a private company $350 million to produce all this information and not requiring the money back? And giving Pearson tax breaks for doing it? Here's a definition of Common Core for you, my first one. Common Core is an out-of-control, it's an unholy alliance between an out-of-control federal government and a very small group of crony capitalist companies who are making billions off of this. Give you this, look at Bill Gates for a second. The idea that Bill Gates is somehow this neutral actor. It's been estimated that over 70% of American school districts, 70, are going to have to upgrade their technology, a little or a lot, Whose computers do you think are going into those schools? Do you honestly think it's Apple computers? The idea that there is no quid pro quo. What do you think? You think Pearson's getting $350 million from the federal government to go out and make tests and then sell them for their own profit and has no reciprocal agreement with the federal government of the United States? That's what they're telling you here. Non-public practitioners, including test and curriculum publishers, and education reform foundations are behind Common Core. Groups like the Gates Foundation, the Broad Foundation, Achieve Inc., over and over and over. These left-wing 501c3s are pushing all this educational change, right? And the Chicago Resolution says that as a result, the standards better reflect the interests and priorities of corporate education reformers than the best interests and priorities of students. Now, we've been saying this for a year and a half, right? 2 years. But we have the wrong letters before our name. When they tell you you're just a kook, well, the irony is that Karen Lewis really is a kook. But she's a kook who's on your side, right? How about these radical right-wingers? The most liberal news magazine in the country is Salon.com. And Michael Mazenko is one of their editors. Here's what liberal Salon said just in July of this year. Right? The underreported story about Common Core is the millions of dollars to be made developing and selling education materials and tests linked to the new standards. We've already blown up 4 major Common Core myths. State-led, governor-led, right? How about this one? You've heard this one? Standards aren't curriculum. Common Core is just standards, it's not curriculum, so all these bad assignments you see have nothing to do with Common Core. It's just the textbooks. Well, the textbooks were written by Pearson and others in conjunction with the people who wrote the standards. Before the standards were even written fully, Pearson was talking to the Common Core people about how they would produce the curriculum to meet the standards. As a matter of fact, your teachers just showed up in class one year, they went home in the summer, they came back in the fall, all the books had been removed and Common Core books were in their places. There was no way to train your teachers. Your principals didn't know how to do it, they didn't even know what it was. Your superintendents of schools didn't know how to train your teachers. What's the only tools your teachers had to learn how to teach Common Core? It was the textbooks. And if you've seen Common Core textbooks, you'll know the whole book does the teaching for them. You've got the stories they read, all the questions the teachers are supposed to ask in the margins, the quizzes, the writing assignments, the assessments are all in the back. Your teachers, who'd never even been told what Common Core was intellectually or philosophically, were handed books, the books did the teaching. The curriculum is the standards. There is no other way to teach it. You can't go and find non-Common Core ways to teach Common Core. All you have is the materials that were produced years ago and put into your schools. When they tell you that curriculum isn't standards, they're just standards, that's nonsense. The standards are meaningless without the tools you use to implement them. And there are no tools that aren't written by these companies who are making billions off of this. You see how, that's the one that bothers me the most. Because they'll do it to you all the time. You start talking to them about this stuff, and they'll say, they won't even talk to you about it. They're just standards. Let's talk about the standards. We'll talk about the standards. But this stuff is pretty shocking. This is what Mazenko says. Despite claims by Common Core advocates that standards are not curriculum, schools are realizing they need to spend money on new materials and training to meet the new expectations of the standards, especially if the schools are required to do standardized tests, and all of them are. Right? Without doubt, the implementation of Common Core will cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and the U.S. Department of Education is already paying $350 million to education companies like Pearson to develop that curriculum and those tests. Clearly, the Common Core has been incredibly lucrative for businesses, while the benefit to students remains dubious at best. Right? How about this? 1 year ago, only 12% of American teachers opposed Common Core. In 1 year's time, that number is now 40%. What happened in 12 months? They saw it. Right? And remember, most states in the Union aren't like you. You've seen it longer. You've had more years to see it. Places like Wisconsin, teachers have now seen it for 1 year and they're starting to run away. The reason more teachers don't speak out about Common Core, think about it. If the teachers union in your state, like Wisconsin, supports Common Core, and the educational establishment supports Common Core in Wisconsin, you're a Wisconsin teacher who hates Common Core, who's going to defend you if you speak out? Your school administrators are insisting you support it, and your union backs it. Notice what's happened in places like New York and Chicago since the unions pulled out of Common Core? Now New York and Chicago teachers are screaming bloody murder about how much they hate it. Because the unions got their back now.